Laura Eisenhower is the great granddaughter of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and she's written her first book, which has just come out at the beginning of March. And she discusses President Eisenhower's relationship with extraterrestrials and sets the record straight on who really made the decisions in terms of agreements with extraterrestrials. And she views some of the hottest exopolitics topics that are relevant to our planet right now.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome back, Laura, to Exopolitics Today.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. It's so great to see you. Thanks. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, well, congratulations on your book. I mean, it is wonderful that you have your first book out. We've been talking about it for years. So that title, I love your title, Awakening the Truth Frequency. So how did you come up with that title?
Well, I was playing around with a few different titles. I've been trying to get a book out for so long. And yeah, just the feeling of, oh my gosh, where are we today? What really felt just important to really capture people's attention. It's like we're all talking about truth. We're all talking about the Great Awakening. So this title to me really represents what is your truth, right? It's not that there's one truth. There is our own authentic truth that we need to live in strong connection with so that we can have discernment. We can just really appreciate the different life experiences that were happening, that are happening in our life, and allow it to awaken us instead of victimize us or indoctrinate us or keep us looping in a dependency bond with an inverted system. So I like to bring up all these sort of topics and allow the reader to really discern. I've done a lot of research. I don't have a lot of fixed beliefs. I have a lot of feelings, though, based on the common threads that come together that lead me to believe that something must have happened, or I'm at least getting warmer or closer to the truth. But really, it's ultimately about awakening our own inner truth, understanding what our dormant DNA is made of, feeling more empowered to embrace the different emotions that come up. Because I feel like whatever we would call ascension symptoms or whatever we might be processing is going to bring up a lot for us. But it's very easy to think something's wrong with us, give our power away, medicate it, mask it. And I think it's really key to give it more of a voice, because I feel our inner calling is linked to this. And I could get into that a little bit more, but it kind of goes into the fact that we're elemental beings. So if a lot is going to come up for us, don't we want to listen and understand what our intuition and our higher awareness is trying to tell us, instead of be like, oh, something's wrong with me, I feel depressed or I feel angry. But very often when we listen to that and give it a voice, it's giving us very important information about what we're longing for, what we're passionate about. And we don't want to just sit on the sidelines anymore. So that's kind of the gist of the title of why I chose that.
I think it's a very important point that you raise. Not holding any fixed belief system, being fluid, being discernant, and being aware of what resonates. What truth resonates. In a way, it kind of reminds me of Mahatma Gandhi, and his first book actually was titled "The Story of My Experiments with Truth." I don't know if you know that. But Mahatma Gandhi, I mean, he thought that this was really the key in terms of his political journey, and his activism is like finding out what is the truth, that there wasn't one overriding truth that kind of was the same for everybody. It was like you had to like experience the truth through your life. You had to just like be flexible, follow what it was that worked for you. So I thought that was very interesting, and I think your title in a way kind of mirrors what Gandhi, how he titled his book.
Oh, that's so cool. I didn't even know about that book. The Story of My Experiments with Truth. Yeah. Well, I really like that. And that's the thing, that we can all agree to disagree. And that if we are a part of this larger conversation together, we can assist one another. I mean, I learn more and more all the time. I'm constantly connecting dots. There are things that I used to feel that I don't feel anymore. but I want to lay it all out. So, in the beginning of the book, you might hear about Dan Cooper. Later in the book, you're going to hear about all this other research that isn't exactly what Dan Cooper says or what others say, but I'd prefer to lay it all out there and see what the reader thinks. And maybe, everybody's going to walk away with differing in opinions, different processes to go through. And of course, you're one of the greatest researchers and scholars out there when it comes to this topic. I quote you quite a bit. I don't know if you saw that yet. And I've quoted Elena. I mean, so there's a whole bunch of things. And what I've captured is where the common threads are, where, okay, more than one person has said this, but also how can one person's whistleblow commentary not just be thrown out the window, but where can we just take enough of that and maybe realize that certain levels were not available for them to be able to blow the whistle on, because there was like 21 levels above presidents back after 47, then 28 levels. So whistleblowers weren't exactly going to get the kind of information that is a bit more accessible now. And even Dan Cooper says, question this. I'm not sure about this exact thing, but I can say without a shadow of a doubt, this particular part, is valid. So I just took the bits and pieces that seem to make the most sense. I definitely feel some kind of unconditional surrender agreement took place when the UFOs flew over. And I wasn't even thinking about that years ago or tying that together. And that just made sense. So, yeah. So I just want it to be more of an activation for people. And then when it comes to the information I present, that hopefully, they're just taking what resonates and not worrying about the rest, because I'm not really into shoving anything down somebody's throat. Like, this is the truth. It's more like, let's embrace our inner truth and enjoy the diversity and not let it work against us or pit us against each other. So,
Okay. Well, I do have some questions that I'd like to raise about Dan Cooper, but before we get there, why don't you just tell us about this bloodline connection you have, of course, with President Eisenhower? I mean, it's more than a bloodline connection; it's also a kind of soul connection, almost like fulfilling a mission. So, what your family, your bloodline connection with the president, how is that relevant? How is that important for kind of bringing out the truth and this awakening that we're in at the moment as a planet?
Yeah. And I definitely, that's a big part of it. Just my journey of finding my own truth. And again, it's about just being true to myself. And just gaining as much as I possibly can from what comes along my way in a synchronistic way, and also my pursuit of things through research. But really, the Mars recruitment that I went through in 2006, we talked to each other right after that. While I was actually still trying to get out of it, I was still living in North Carolina at the time. And a lot of what I understood about it and what I've learned, especially listening to other whistleblowers, which I wasn't really in touch with at the time until, after I started talking to you and I just was opened up to a much larger picture, was that this related to Alternative 3, which was presented in the Eisenhower administration. So I felt a calling from childhood, but I also felt targeting on me. And so it's been a lifelong journey of trying to understand that. At first, I'm like, okay, is this me? Am I creating this disruption in my life? And then it started to get more and more validated based in certain synchronicities. And I one time stumbled upon a clairvoyant institute in California that had its doors open for people to just kind of get a sample reading. And I just walked through the door. I wasn't even carrying the last name Eisenhower. And they said, Eisenhower just walked in. And after the meditation, I came up to them and I said, I'm related to him. They go, yeah, he just walked through the door with you. He's your spirit guide. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've always felt that way. And then they helped me to understand the psychotronic weaponry, the invisible weaponry, the targeting. They tried to help me and they couldn't really help me. And then just learning about the aviary and a lot of the different characters within the aviary, which is a group of, scientists, physicists and military men and people that investigate the whole UFO phenomenon, but are actually much more involved than just that. There are those in that group connected to my labs, psychotronic weapons, gang stalking, but they're not all like nefarious characters. And I feel this is a lot of what we see. There's compartmentalism. Not everybody is playing the dark role. A lot of well-intentioned people might be duped more than anything. So I traced that back to the guidance that I got. I feel like he was helping to prepare me. I found out also from remote viewers, not just recently, but way back, that I had some sort of influence in his administration. I had a connection with Val Thor, and that there was an agreement to, through his relationship with star beings, to have a descendant that would help to bring about the truth, and uh, help to, like many others, understand more of what that final speech was about when he warned about the military industrial complex. So I feel with the crazy journey of being targeted and being steered to go off planet, and his guidance and support, and some of the other things that began to fall into place, and a lot of the communications I was getting without really giving them a whole lot of information, and many different people saying the same thing, it's like, okay, I think we definitely have an agreement. He also talked about a migration of advanced souls coming in 1952, the same year he supposedly, the supposed unconditional surrender agreement took place. And then supposedly he invaded not Area 51, that was later, but the Dulce underground base in 1954, the same year that we hear he signed treaties with the Greys. So I was like, okay, there's more information that is being unearthed that I hadn't even heard about. I wasn't even speaking on it. So I just, bring that to light. And I just feel like with his guidance, I always felt a nudge if there was more to go on. My curiosity or an urgency would light up in me, and I would just keep digging, or somebody or something would find me and show me, more than what I first thought or had known. And then, I just kind of put it all out there. So I feel like there's an agreement there, but I see it more like a teamwork. We all agreed to come in this particular window and bring about as much truth and disclosure, in a time where disclosure is going to be a much more public thing. And I feel like we are, in a sense, guardians and guides of this process, to help people discern. And also, this is a window period connected to ascension, the advancement of our human vessel, overcoming dark agendas and indoctrination, and all the different psyops and assaults that we deal with as a human race. So I just feel, I've just been so immersed in it all, and then getting out of the Mars recruitment, and that being linked to the Eisenhower administration, alternatives 1, 2, and 3, and that being about colonizing Mars, the way it was presented to me, how I didn't have a whole lot to go on, and just how he would just show up in dreams, or I'd have dreams. And I definitely was being assisted. I think, God only knows if I didn't have the assistance. It's already hard enough to process this stuff. And I feel like he's like here for humanity, and it's beyond just being a family member. I love the things that he has said about awakening, starseed missions, how it's very detrimental to not believe in those missions, or to be talked out of them, or carry stigmas connected to, being projected upon, or laughed at, or ridiculed, and whatever the label is. Not everybody resonates with starseed. Some it's like Earth Warrior, some is like, it doesn't matter what the label is, but I love how he said the governments had better get out of the way and let the people have peace. And that it's not about the government structure. It's not about looking at one man or one leader. And, him warning us about the military industrial complex with this shadow government really being in more power than him. I just feel not just him as a guide. I feel like he's, guided, a lot of individuals, maybe not in a way that they can truly pick up on, because I don't always feel him there, but it's definitely when I was younger. But I feel that, that somehow Val Thor and some of these benevolent groups, and some of the contactees, and experiencers that as well, we're all a part of this greater unfolding of what has really been taking place that we just haven't learned about in our schools. It's not in our history books. People have led to believe that we won the Second World War, and we know that's really not the case. It's been a war on consciousness. So however we can get that message out, and however we come to that conclusion, that's enough, I feel, to at least be able to wrap our head around, regardless of how accurate every step along the way is. That's the hard part. But you know, you've brought so much information forward about the service to self beings and the service to others, and the multi layers of the secret space programs being like 10 of them, right? I mean, that is such valuable information and research. I don't think we'd be as far down this road if it weren't for somebody like you. And yeah, I've just been called to do my part, and putting out this book is, just kind of like, this is what I've discovered along the way. And I love how you discern it because of your background, and your opinion about it is, absolutely, very important to just like express to people, what you agree with and what you don't agree with, because you're somebody with a solid foundation that would be able to navigate this a little bit easier than somebody that just hearing it for the first time.
Yeah, I think this is a very important period in our history, and it's relevant to what we're going through right now. And you're absolutely right that people have to learn about this, that this has to be presented, and your book does present that front and center. So these are agreements, these meetings that President Eisenhower had with extraterrestrial civilizations. I mean, your book really sets out to set the record straight, in terms of clarifying exactly who was the real power behind it. So, why don't you just walk people through why it's important that people get this straight? Because I know a lot of people think, well, Eisenhower was president, and in the 1950s, you had the Great Treaty signed and a bunch of other meetings at Holloman Air Force Base, Edwards, all under Eisenhower, and all the agreements were reached. So the implication, of course, is that Eisenhower knowingly participated in all of that. So you want to set the record straight. So why don't you tell us, in your view, exactly what happened?
Right. Okay. So and again, I think the timing of my book was going to need to be on hold until I got more information. Even Elena talks about this, that MJ-12 signed the treaties behind his back. The unconditional surrender agreement of 1952 under Truman, where we surrendered to the Nazis after the flyover. Supposedly those crafts were from Antarctica. This was after the failed mission of Admiral Byrd, Operation High Jump. So Project Paperclip had taken place, 1947. And here's somebody that tried to take down the Nazis, tried to, really play the role as general in that war. And it just didn't seem to make sense that he would, sign treaties unless his hands were totally tied, unless he was threatened. So I was sharing that. I was like, okay, yeah, there's a strong chance that he might have. Now, he might have attended something, but what I have come to understand is he had no ability to sign treaties with any alien species, because the unconditional surrender agreement handed that power over to MJ-12. So Dan made it really, really clear, and he gets kind of a little bit annoyed with me. He's like, how many times do I have to tell you? Because I'm like, well, what about this? And what about this person? What about this? And what about what Phil Schneider said, or William Cooper? And they're not related, even though they had the same last name. He said, those were legit whistleblowers, but they just did not have access to this information. So seeing that these events took place in 54 during the same year that he supposedly signed treaties, here he is invading Dulce underground base, and that battle was lost 30-1. The Green Berets, the U.S. Army, were sent in, and we don't hear about that. And that was supposedly bigger than the one that happened in 1969. So is there any way to really prove that and validate that? Well, we can only really go by what we hear, and it's great to have other corroborating, whistleblowers to really confirm that. But it's hard to really doubt a lot of what he says. So the later Dulce invasion in 1969, then what Anonymous told us, with Richard Dolan's interview with Anonymous on his deathbed, said that he wanted to send the First Army to Area 51, and he was furious because MJ-12 had their hands on the alien technology and he had lost control. So I think we all know that he lost control. Question is, was some treaty signed where they didn't honor the treaty, and that's when he got sidelined? It just doesn't seem to add up, because Elena Danaan also said MJ-12 signed behind his back, and then things that Alex Collier has said. So there's no way, because none of us were really there. I mean, one can remote view, or one might just have greater access that have been more involved. But I've even asked my family, and you showed the picture of my aunts and uncles and my mother, that, did this dentist appointment even happen? And if he was taken somewhere, was he inside to even be able to sign treaties? Because activity was going on during the Second World War, that there was some sort of ET government exchange taking place starting in the 30s and Roosevelt's administration. So a lot of that information I've been tying in, but I also tie in, other things that might not even say that. But where this person didn't mention this other thing. It's like, okay, here's a hodgepodge, sort of a potpourri, and hopefully, like people like you and others that are really well versed in this, can maybe just see where you go with it. But it just makes sense with the flyover, with the year that it was, with Truman setting up MJ-12, and some things about Dulles and some things about some other things that we hear aren't actually, the case. And I feel like this is the tactic of the deep state, is to create false narratives so that in this time of disclosure, we would not be getting the real information, and we'd be turning our attention on, oh, that's Eisenhower to blame, and this was an abduction technology trade gone bad, when actually that had started, and the first level of Great Treaty actually was 10 years previous. And so that's from other whistleblowers. And again, it's hard to get to the bottom of things, but the best we can do is just put out all the information and work with what we've got. But the most, I would say the biggest priority of the book, though, is for people to just, be true to themselves, have discernment, be a part of these greater conversations, and just see where you're taken on this wild journey. But yeah, so the unconditional surrender agreement makes sense, but that doesn't mean, there weren't these continual treaties. And there's been other treaties, I hear. And so supposedly Eisenhower set up the Earth Alliance, the USMC special section that Randy Kramer talks about, that helped to undo the secret space program trauma and mind control, to redirect them towards, this executive order that was getting more and more activated as time went on, in order to keep the MJ-12 boys in check, which is how Randy put it. And then the Earth Alliance, the White Hats. So the baton was sort of passed down, and Val Thor supposedly helped him connect to the Guardians to put up the outer barrier. And we know who talked about that with the Sphere Being Alliance. And then, so there's little bits to take from all over the place. And then, there's something that can easily hijack the process, which it makes it very difficult. So, I mean, I
Well,
think you've got the most important foundational stuff there, and the rest I think is just fine tuning in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, let's do a little bit of that fine tuning, because I think this idea that President Truman and the US Congress signed a surrender treaty with the Antarctica Nazis on July 19, 1952 by Dan Cooper, I don't think that's right at all. I don't think that's the way it happened at all. I think, wherever he got his information, no one else talks about that. Have not come across anyone else talking about that, but I've come across quite a few people, and Jim Mars, he wrote the book, The Fourth Reich, and I wrote the book, Antarctica's Hidden History, and I agree with Jim that there was a covert takeover, and it happened through the special access programs. It happened through MJ-12, working with the Germans in Antarctica. So it was done covertly, because there's no way in the world that members of the US Congress in 1952 would have been psychologically capable of signing a surrender agreement with the Nazis in Antarctica. They would have said, we will fight to the last effing man. We will never give up, because that's the psychological profile of Americans. They will not give up. They will not sign an unconditional surrender. So I think Cooper, I don't know where he got that from, whether he's making it up, but I think that but there is a truth there, and the truth was there was a covert takeover. MJ-12 did agree to terms with the Antarctic Germans, which in a way could be likened to a surrender. So I think, it's like there's a half truth there. There's some truth there, but I think this unconditional surrender, there's no way psychologically American members of Congress would have been capable of doing such a thing in July 1952. But covertly, definitely, yes, that was what was happening behind the scenes.
Right. And it's there's a lot here. I mean, as far as where he gets his information from, and he mentioned that that Ike inherited this treaty and had nothing to do with the unconditional surrender. And I know that he wasn't the only one. And so him, along with others, put other plans in place through the help of Val Thor, because Val Thor was definitely an advisor. And supposedly Val Thor warned about the Nordics and the Greys because the Nordics had an association with the Dracos. Was it the same Nordics that were, supposedly that first contact? So what Dan says is that he has immunities. He used to be a part of Dark Fleet that was turned around. He became the senior advisor to the Earth Alliance. And really, the reason it hasn't been mentioned before is because the threat was too great. And I'm like, well, why now? And he just says he has immunities because he works directly with the Guardians. And this is all very important to be questioned. There's no doubt, I agree with you, that there was some covert takeover, Project Paperclip, all the different MK Ultra programs coming in. But something so big like that, like you're saying, yeah, I mean, it really hasn't been mentioned before. But I felt it important because of the way him and I communicated, the kind of questions I asked. He didn't really have to give me this information. He didn't ask for anything from it. He barely wanted me to share it and, share his name, but it just kind of evolved in that way. And it just ended up being something he felt, necessary. So I think with the help of Val Thor, Eisenhower was able to set up certain things. But yeah, I think it's hard to determine exactly how that would have made sense, how that would have happened. But the flyover supposedly was the major time of intimidation, and that it was a surrender. And then when you hear about Gerald Light or I think Philip Corso talks about, we had to surrender. As long as we didn't have the ability to fight them, we could only surrender. But that was supposedly later on, like years later. And that was supposedly not called an unconditional surrender agreement, but it was similar terminology of the word surrender. So this might have happened in multiple parts. It might have happened after a massive infiltration, because when we think about, these organizations, these 3-letter organizations, but I have to agree with you. I mean, the mindset of Americans and just everything that this country has strived to be would not have been just surrendered like that. So I think, if that was done covertly and Eisenhower did something covertly, he must have had a massive team. Because I'm like, this, this can't just be Eisenhower and Val Thor. There must have been a huge number of people. And so he didn't have all those details, but he didn't exactly disagree. So, he's not going to have the full picture. But it's definitely something, to see if that comes up again. But again, why now? So one term divides the power to sign treaties with alien species in the hands of MJ-12. So Elena, says these were signed by MJ-12, not Eisenhower. But it just seems that some kind of agreement like that would be way more covert. So right, the fact that it says that all Congress signed and every president since Truman. So he says that Eisenhower had to go along with it, but he didn't like really go along with it. In fact, he had to sort of act like he was going along with it and then set up all these, things that wouldn't come to light till later. And that's what Randy Kramer talks about, the executive order that these things would be disclosed if things had gone too far. But that's the USMC special section. So I think we can take bits of it. And that's what I encourage with the book. Take bits of it, see where it makes sense, especially to somebody like you with all that somebody who's reading it for the first time. Do your research. Look at what this person says and that person says. It's not all about Dan. So, and I think that's very important. All these question marks are really important to explore. So I'm glad you bring that up. But I do know, without a shadow of a doubt, or it feels really right to me, based in a number of people saying this, that MJ-12 signed these treaties behind his back. And Eisenhower might have been flown close by. It might have been a cover story to be able to say, where's your alibi? When they say, where were you during the time of this particular event? Well, nobody really knew. Did he really go to a dentist? Did it ever get proven he went to that dentist? No. So.
Right. Now, in terms of Eisenhower not signing those agreements with the extraterrestrials, and that being actually something that had been signed by the Majestic 12 group, that is an important point. Now, I think as I understand it, Elena Danaan was the first to bring that up, that this was something she got from Valiant Thor, and then others kind of jumped in and said something similar to that. But is that correct? I mean, was Elena the first one to say, yeah, it was that she met with Valiant Thor and that he told her that, yes, Eisenhower, he was basically tricked by the Majestic 12 groups, and it was the Majestic 12 that signed it, because that kind of fits in with my research.
Yes, totally. So she was the first person. We connected through a comment section on my YouTube when I used to have that channel. And one of the quotes in my books say, I could confirm to her through the words of Val Thor that her great-grandfather had never intended to sign agreements with the Greys and was fooled by the MJ-12, a certainty that Laura always had in her heart. And then Val Thor said some things about knowing me and, just my quest to bring, as much truth to light as possible. Again, not without saying, question what I bring to the table. It's more about the truth of what we're up against, which is, being duped out of being able to advance ourselves as humans, and all the different psyops, psychological warfare, spiritual warfare that we're dealing with. Yeah. So to get to the nitty gritty of the root of all that, that's a journey in and of itself. But yeah, she definitely was the first to say that. And I feel, if it was more about being tricked and never intended to sign agreements, was he somehow coerced? I mean, I think there's documents that might not be legit that show that he signed something, but this unconditional surrender agreement would show that only MJ-12 had the ability to do that. So Val Thor at least can, through her, validate that he never had the intention to sign. So, that, he vowed to protect the descendants, and that, I have, felt that, especially when I was younger. And okay, so here it says there's no doubt that MJ-12 was involved in an agreement done behind Eisenhower's back that was already in the works. From what Elena has shared, he was present for one of those meetings, but there were others where he wasn't in attendance. And the ones that we determined he was probably not in attendance to or for was when MJ-12 actually signed. So he might have been present, which might validate him being taken to some underground or Air Force Base facilities. But yeah, I mean, the most important thing that we know is there was a takeover, something that he couldn't really stop. And some of the branches of the positive military and levels of the secret space program, he played an influence in establishing in order to, hopefully be able to take down what he wasn't able to back then. And not all on his own. I feel there were more than likely many. Maybe they had to stay real quiet, because it seemed things had to skip a generation. It was very difficult to bring this kind of information forward without having, serious threats. I mean, it's enough that we get the threats that we get. But I almost feel like my mom's generation, it had to skip a generation because this is a window where so many of us would be coming forward that it would be a lot different than just say like Phil Schneider or William Cooper, or, those books being written and those testimonies being made. And a lot of those testimonies say a lot about Eisenhower signing these agreements. And I think it had to wait before we'd find out that it didn't quite happen that way. But, there might be some kind of trail or paper trail, and false documents that might have been put in place, because there were a lot of plans I know that have been put, in place to falsify documents and lead us down a false disclosure timeline that, but we still have to consider all these things. I almost feel like we're in a massive courtroom and we've got, all this witness testimony, experiencers, contactees, researcher, and we're all just laying it out on the table, and it'll give us what we need to discern so that we always have something to look at instead of just being in the dark. And that will be the greatest navigational tools that we could possibly have, are the books like yours and hopefully mine that we've left behind, and that are available for people to just, begin to process this. So I just want to do my part, because it's like, okay, this is what I found out, but there were things that I found out before and it ended up changing, so again, it's a whole lot of, different things there and written. And I do feel something happened after the failed expedition, after they went to the underground facilities in Antarctica, and after Project Paperclip and the establishment of these 3-letter organizations. It really began with Truman, and before that in Roosevelt's administration. Not necessarily Roosevelt, though. Something with Hitler, Crowley, and Churchill, from what I've heard. So again, are we on multiple timelines? Are there different things that we've experienced in our history that isn't all the same? I mean, there's so many question marks when it comes to the craziness that we're dealing with. There's looking glass technologies, there's time travel, and can people time travel back and change things so that the trajectory is different? I mean, there's so much mind-blowing stuff to wrap one's head around, and I'm
Now,
just
I did want to bring up something because I think this connection between President Eisenhower and President Truman is an important one. And I read a book, you probably know about it as well, Paul Blake Smith, where he talked about the book titled Eisenhower's Encounters. I don't know if you've read that book, but he pointed out something that I didn't know, which was that under President Truman, there was the Aztec UFO crash, and that there was a live alien, an EBE. Well, he was kind of like a human-looking extraterrestrial, and he actually met with Truman, and he met with Eisenhower. While Eisenhower, just after he resigned as SACO, Supreme Allied Commander of the European Forces, and I think while he was just about to go to Columbia University, and that he met with this alien, and that's how that was the beginning of these agreements with these human-looking extraterrestrials, and that later on, when Eisenhower became president, that these humans came back, and that kind of connects us to that first meeting at Edwards Air Force Base, where there was a diplomatic meeting with these human-looking extraterrestrials. Bill Cooper talked about it in his "Behold the Pale Horse," and he said that that's when Eisenhower was warned about the Greys. So, according to William Cooper, Eisenhower was warned about the Greys by these Nordic extraterrestrials who arrived as part of these diplomatic agreements that began earlier in 1948 under Truman and under Eisenhower. Well, Eisenhower was consulted on it. So I don't know if you know anything about Paul Blake Smith's book Eisenhower's Encounters, but I think it does bring out a fascinating element that gives us a better way of understanding, who Eisenhower met at Edwards Air Force Base in 1954. In in February, in February 1954, and how we got a warning about these tall greys that were coming, and to be careful of them.
right. And then I also heard that he wanted to disclose all of this, and he was talked out of it. He wanted to make this known, and he was advised that that wasn't a good idea. So he began to work. Even the Law of One states that he was a well-intentioned military man. Other star beings, with this book handed to me, that said, this was from a Cherokee woman, a Lakota, Dakota woman connected to this lineage, that said star beings had contacted him, talked about this migration of souls and a child being born into his family. And this book was just handed to me. Like, she said, they're talking about you. They're talking about your great grandfather. And she said, just, and I put quotes in that in my book. So we don't hear about that encounter. And so, yes, I have heard about that, about the Nordics. But, I also heard that Commander Valthor warned the U.S. about the Nordics in 1952 when Truman was president, before this encounter, and said that the U.S. He told the U.S. that the Nordics at the time were still in bed with the Nazis and were in bed with the Nazis. So that does not make sense to this benevolent diplomatic warning, which I've heard Palladians or Nordic-looking ones did warn about. The Greys, because of the nuclear weapons, and that makes sense because there are many contactees that have said this as well. So just like there's been a lot more UFO crashes than what they admit to about, Roswell, there's way more than that. Maybe there's a lot more encounters than we're being told. I do believe that there must have been a positive, race. Was that the beings from Venus? I don't, because supposedly Valthor was not just put on VIP status in the late 1950s when he came off of Victor 1, but that he was already consulting and warning about benevolent looking ones, and warning also about the Greys. So this doesn't quite make sense to other information that we've heard. about Eisenhower meeting with the Nordics and having that be the first contact. So I talk about all of that. I present that in the book as well. So it's sort of like, okay, this could have happened and this could have happened. This is what I feel intuitively, but I don't claim to have it all correct. I wasn't there. So, with all that no, I'm not. I mean, I've heard those things. I haven't read that book fully and completely. So I think future books are just future interviews. What I put down is, something to just like have there, and then more should fall into place as time goes on, and I can update people with more that I might find out. And what I might, find out, especially, from somebody like you, which I'm already finding out just talking to you right now and just what I've researched about your work. That's why I bring you in. And I might have, put a lot of emphasis on Dan Cooper and at the time and when I was writing it, it was just so resonating. And when people read about him and all the different quotes, they can determine, of course, but I don't just limit it to what he said. But yes, I did hear about that, about the Nordics, but it was Eisenhower's administration. Was Eisenhower, there? I mean, I think this covert takeover obviously didn't happen overnight. And there was still, warnings and things that could have maybe prevented it from going further than it already had, because we're dealing with off-planet entities that are, renewing a contract about abduction and about ET trades with technology. But one thing is very clear being raised in this family, that if he did sign these agreements, he would have probably been a part of the interplanetary corporate conglomerate. We probably would be sitting on trust funds or lots of money, and probably would have access to these sort of technologies. And we would be a very different kind of family that would have been more caught up in all of that. Unless, yes, he was tricked, his hands were tied, and maybe, yes, if that was his signature, or maybe it was forged. I mean, who knows? But all I know is being raised in this family, there was no indication, doing hypnoregression and being like, okay, and just really just feeling into his childhood, growing up as a farm boy with a Mennonite background and his passion and his mission. It just doesn't really line up that he would be in agreement to that. And I feel he's either made a lot of devastating errors because he didn't really have a choice. And this force that he tried to defeat in World War II was so much bigger than just the war. We're talking about galactic war, that, what can one human actually really do? So to counteract it, I believe he did set up these positive branches of military. But yes, I think there's a lot to still, look at. And the ones that are writing these things, like you talked about, are really legit sources, right? So.
Mhm. Well, that positive military that Eisenhower created, that's a very important point, because, I mean, I first heard of that from Randy Kramer. I mean, I interviewed him back in 2014, and he talked about the US Marine Corps Special Section. It was the first time I had ever heard of that, but he said Eisenhower had created it as a kind of like final defense to protect the US Republic in case these agreements with the extraterrestrials went south. And I had another whistleblower, I don't know if you remember him, Michael Gerloff, who also was a US Marine, and he had a lot of documents. And he kind of like dropped off the scene because I think he revealed too much. And he had some handlers that really wanted him not to talk too much about this stuff. And then you mentioned, of course, Dan Cooper in the book, also talking about this special section. So I think that does exist. I think that really was created by Eisenhower for precisely the reason that these people say, that Eisenhower wanted to create. He didn't trust Majestic 12. He wanted to create this fallback, this kind of like elite military organization that would protect the US Republic if these agreements really compromised the future integrity of the states. And I think that's very relevant to what's happening right now. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the whole alternative 3 scenario, and Randy Kramer, not Cooper, Randy Kramer talks about, what has been sort of the bigger picture for him about his role in alternative 3, none other than trying to stop it. He said he was a grunt when he was on Mars and when he was a pilot, and was higher ranked flying grunt, he says, and that this USMC special section was to reverse a lot of what had taken place in Project Moonshadow, the Project Mannequin that's underneath that umbrella, or Moonshadows underneath the umbrella of the Mannequin, and that he chose the Marine Corps because they had this sort of shipmate and teammate mentality, and he wanted, this kind of type of military force to keep the MJ-12 individuals in check, and that this would be to offset Alternative 3, right? So Earth Alliance is another one. White Hats is another one. So, as much as one can go up in those areas of secret space program, I mean, once you get into Dark Fleet, I mean, and the different trades that we know go on, and how one could be in a dark program and then all of a sudden be shoveled into something more benevolent. I mean, something about that USMC special section was able to intervene and redirect people like Randy into a different direction. Because he said if it wasn't for your great grandfather, he wouldn't have made it. And that he saved his life. And he was able to, that somehow there were elements to this military force that was able to somehow deprogram and move them in a different direction out of the trauma and mind control. And he even said the healing process changed that was from this, and that he became all free of all programming and mind control, like I just said. And then command requested he does, something that with others that were part of this, to keep their eye on the MJ-12 folks, not just go into the Mars Defense Force and protect the Mars colonies, but have, a different mission in mind to then sort of watch what they were doing and then expose things if they went too far. And that it's still a lot for me to learn. I have a pretty good grip on it, but he definitely talks about the Mars 3 alternative 3 scenario. So being recruited to go to Mars, and then when him and I were connecting dots about the Mars colonies that he did a 17-year stint defending, when really the USMC special section wasn't looking for that alternative 3 scenario to be successful, because it seemed to get hijacked. And me and Andrew Bishago talked about this. There's nothing wrong with protecting the human genome in the event of catastrophe and cataclysm. But what we have to look at is the fact that a lot of the dark weaponry that I feel is a part of those technology exchanges with these more shadow groups is about the simulation and engineering of an artificial timeline that would be catastrophic, that would compromise surface humans into a new world order or depopulation, what we see in the Georgia guide zones, that was all a part of, alternatives 2 and 3, going underground into underground bases, chosen elites, or going off planet. And I'm certainly not a chosen elite. I think I would have been used. I think I would have been I think I would have really regretted going there. And he even said to me, you might have preserved your physical body going to Mars, but you probably would have lost your soul, because he knew what was going on there. They presented it to me like it was some sort of protection to sort of, remember using Richard as bait, ancient ants or whatever, using him as bait. They located us in previous lifetime using looking glass technologies to make it look like this is for your benefit. This is for your protection. While humanity's dealing with fake alien invasions, pandemic, and all these different tactics to really compromise, us on a surface level. So the best we can do is call all this out. We're going to see casualties, but hopefully, the more benevolent disclosures we're going to see are going to be really helpful technologies to help undo the weaponry and the assaults that the human race has been contending with, and also help those that have been through the trauma-based mind control to hopefully end up like Kathy O'Brien and others who've been able to break through. So that's that's the only thing that I can think of as what comes after alternative 3. So I just say alternative 4, just to add another thing that already exists, which is there's got to be this organic ascension timeline, and all these different things line up to the fact that exists. Not just prophecies, but galactic history and other things pointing to that, and how this would be a period and a window period where the galactic cores are aligned. We're able to switch on dormant DNA, but as this is available, the onslaught and attacks are at an all-time high. So the more we can call out these things, they can't just run away off to their Mars colonies, into their underground bases, and leave us here just being blasted to smithereens. If we can shift our vibration and be the override frequency, I feel like we can de-weaponize the weapons. So I think a lot of the disclosures that you're connected with, that ring more positivity on this future timeline. While we have discernment for what might be imposters that look benevolent, is definitely worth bringing a lot of attention to. So,
Yes, well, yeah, definitely. We want to be discerning in terms of who we think are our allies as opposed to those that are imposters. So, this takes me to two authors that you mentioned that kind of like touch on some of these issues, and maybe this will be something we can kind of discuss at length. So, you mentioned Ashania Dean and Lisa Renee as two authors that you've most resonated with in terms of their work and the influence on you. So why do you feel that about those two authors? And maybe for those that don't know who they are, maybe give each one a quick thumbnail description.
right. So Ashiana Diane, author of The Voyagers. There's, I think, 3 in the series. And she has a Keylontics dictionary. And it's about the freedom teachings and the Dora Torah texts and just teachings that were once available, particularly to indigos and the Palladorians, which are the cloister races, that held freedom teachings that helped us to learn how to be Christed individuals and remember our galactic heritage and our history and all the different galactic wars that have taken place. Um, Lisa Renee, she just has a direct connect to the Guardians and is like one of them, really, like in Earth form, and went through this massive awakening. And I am more aligned as far as communication wise and information wise with Lisa Renee, because as that information was coming more to me, it first started with Ashiana, but then when I met Lisa, just her newsletters and Ascension Glossary and the epic 6-hour conversations, 8-hour conversations her and I have had, and how much she's had my back, I just think it's incredible. And my research about the Christ Sophia energy, our divine blueprint, and that piece of history, I feel, question some of the Gnostic texts. I think there are a lot of patriarchal slants to a lot of ancient texts, and I think it just brings some clarity. And not all of it is like presented as total fact. It's like, okay, here's the Guardian perspective, and I feel her ability to bring it in and really explain it are really, really eye-opening newsletters. I have to admit, some kind of goes over my head. I'm not mentioning every single thing that I've read. I only bring the pieces in that I've either had a download about or I just felt such a resonance with, that it helped me to connect dots about other things that I've researched, and it helped to bring more clarity. Like Rudolf Steiner, I've quoted a bunch of times, and he talks about the Luciferian rebellion kind of killed the Sophionic energy and sort of pulled that energy in. We hear about Tiamat exploding. That was a Sophionic planet. The fragmentation of all that, the Akamoth energy, and how that's been harnessed and inverted to be like this womb that births archonic energies, and like the worship of the Baphomet and the Dark Mother reversals, the manipulation of the planetary grid network that I talk about, that has messed with the ley lines, our junk DNA, how our DNA links to the ley lines, the planetary grid network, the stargates, and the multidimensional cosmos. I bring in the Venus transits and things that they don't talk about, but I'm like, okay, here's what I've heard over here. This makes sense over there, and it's sort of like it's not all coming from one person. So it's kind of like, okay, this resonates. I had this sort of download versus kind of giving my power away and being like, okay, whatever they say flies and goes. Like it has to kind of pass my discernment, my intuition, and line up with something else. And the rest I'm just open-minded to, but I didn't really include it because I am either not feeling it. It's something I haven't processed yet. It's something I'm open to, but it just doesn't fit in with the goal of what my book is about. It's something that people can look into if they want to delve into those particular authors that I mentioned, right? So, like I mentioned, Rudolf Steiner. If people are like, "Oh yeah, that book where that's mentioned, I want to read that whole book," right? But I'm not going to mention everything, and it's all going to be him. I'm sort of coming from a place, because I was so young when these downloads were coming to me, and it wasn't just my mission. It was like, okay, where have we been? What is the root of it? What is our true galactic history? And yeah, I've learned a lot from Alex. I've learned a lot from you. the Orion Wars, the Lyran Wars, how our DNA has sort of become what it is today. That, again, I say in the beginning, take what resonates and leave the rest is as close as I can get. This makes sense. But did it all happen this way 100%? I'm not sure, because, I'm not including the full body of anybody's work. I'm more like, okay, this is me being true to myself. This is what I've discovered. These are the dots I've connected. Now, what do you think, for the reader? And that's the best I can really do, because I feel like if I were to base too much of it on just Lisa or just Ashiana or both of them or just any one person, then, I would just recommend their book instead of bother writing mine. So again, I've picked out the most relevant and resonant pieces of what I've learned from them, but I don't include the whole shebang. A lot of it gets real technical. A lot of it, I can't say I feel is inaccurate, but I can't say it's 100% either. I'm very careful like that, just as general as a person. That's just my personality, just kind of, and I'm skeptical to myself. I was always like, all right, Laura, are you sure? Even with the Mars stuff, I'm like, what if that was just a virtual reality? What if they were just messing with me? What if there's no, and then, okay, then I meet so-and-so and so-and-so, and all the darts start to connect with the intention in my heart. I just want to get to the bottom of things with as much of an open mind as possible, because I'm afraid if I get too stuck in what somebody told me or what I think, then I'll put the blinders on and I'll miss something.
Right. Well, with Ashania Dean, I'm glad you said, take the best and leave the rest. And you kind of like, in a way, say that you've not really following her material too much, because I first came across Ashania Dean back in 2004, and I really liked her book, and bought it, still, her two books, and still have it now. Read through it, and a lot of it resonated, but some things stuck out. There were things that really stuck in my throat there, or it was like real problems. Like, she talks about the fallen angelic Anunnaki groups, and she included amongst them the Galactic Federation, the Ashtar Command, and Archangel Michael. Those are all groups that people talk about in reverent terms today, but she described them as like, these are fallen angelic and Anunnaki groups in conflict with the with these so-called guardian groups. And the things that she said, like things like, for example, she said that Archangel Michael is, quote, and this is from her book, page 258, from this book, she says, is more aptly described and historically known as Archdemon Michael. So I thought, hang on, who talks about Archangel Michael as Archdemon Michael? I haven't come across that before. So I was very guarded, and I kept her at a distance. Even now, after 20 years, I still keep her material at a distance, because frankly, I don't trust where she's coming from.
Right. And there people have talked that she's, compromised. And so again, as much as I've delved into a lot of it, I only really discuss what resonates. I do talk a lot about Anunnaki and fallen factions, but I say this is not all Anunnaki. And if I'm going to talk about this is my, thought about it, that there are fallen elements, but there are also dimensional levels of those beings that are not, it's not like they're just going to go completely dark and just be just demon. The planetary grid network got messed with, the Michael Mary lines, no doubt. The Cornwall to Avery Henge to Glastonbury, those ley lines have been messed with, and dark technologies and reversal grid technologies have been put in place, right? And these are negative factions of Anunnaki. But to put it all on an archangel, Michael is very connected to the Christ energy. I can't go there either. But I feel that there might be a bit of truth there, but there's something missing, because I can't see how Archangel Michael would all of a sudden be a demon, just as much as Sophia, she's got a fallen goddess aspect, but her higher aspect, cosmic mother, and the journeying aspect of the divine mother, and how that relates to the Venus transits and the corrections of the Sophionic energy with the planetary body that also connects with the spark within us, our divine blueprint, these archetypes that exist within us. I don't feel even Enki and Enlil are all negative. I feel there's different levels of all these beings. And at the end of the day, everything's looking to repair itself. And there are different dimensional levels of where their energy may have resided at one point. But once you understand that deeper alchemy and the higher dimensional levels, there's Elohim and Seraphim that never were really fallen. And we can return to that avatar consciousness or those higher levels where we're not just like grappling with the fallen ones and saying all Elohim are negative. Like Krillify is just like, they're all evil. I'm like, there are levels of the Elohim that are not all evil. So I don't like to throw extremes like that myself. I just see more dimensional levels. We came down to this low density. We've sort of fallen, lost ourselves, and we're looking to get back. And I feel like that redemption is happening with Lucifer. I feel like if there is fallen aspects of Michael, it's not demonic. It's where has it been manipulated, maybe by false religions, or just like the Alexandria Library and the Christ Templars or the Essenes got compromised, or some of their teachings got wiped out. I don't really think you can place it on a being. I mean, some say that, Jesus Christ is evil. I mean, I don't have that mentality to go there. And I kind of go ADD when I read those things. And I know it's like I've anchored something in my selective learning that I go ADD, and I read, but I don't absorb it. I just kind of read right past it. And that's kind of how I navigate. And that's happens when I watch movies too. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just missed a whole like half hour. What happened? Like I just go into another realm, and it's same thing with school. It's just if it's better off not coming into my system, I don't tend to allow it in. But I do talk about these factions of the Anunnaki just because I do know our DNA was messed with, but I know that there are many positive factions. I wish I brought more light to those positive factions, but I more said, I'm just putting this in the context of how our DNA has been impacted in the planetary grid network. But think of all the positive levels or factions of Anunnaki connected to Scotland and Ireland and again, I've got a lot more to learn. This is just an intro for people, I think. But I just don't brand it all as negative. I mean, some people would say, pantheons or things in Egypt, but we're dealing with civilizations that have, collapsed or been covered up, and a lot of lost history and a lot of different seedings of the human race. I think there's been more than one Genesis. I feel, there's a lot of competing information about all this. And I think the best thing, we can do is, just navigate to the best of our ability and be as discerning as possible. There are some things that I say that I again mention, I don't have a fixed belief about this. But this makes the most sense to what I feel happened to our DNA. But I also know that seals were purposely put in our DNA because we couldn't exactly go back to Tara or these higher dimensional energies without first cleaning up our act. And that, some of the things that we might look at as evil might have been to our benefit in order to begin to awaken, move through, a lot, and understand that we inherit stuff from our parents, but we don't want to not evolve and take what our parents taught us to the next level. And I feel, there's greater source energy, there's the guardian founder groups, there's the Anunnaki, but it's still a part of our makeup. And that if we can reconcile these forces within ourselves without demonizing any of it, we can begin to rebuild the architecture and move through the different levels that might have so-called dumbed us down. But where do we have opportunities to begin to switch it back on? And can we accept the deeper soul journey of this great awakening without being too polarized in the way we interpret it?
Very nicely said. Well, I want to now kind of like raise some of the comments Lisa Renee has made about a negative alien alliance, because I think it is important because, a lot of people are talking about the Galactic Federation. Of course, we both know of Elena Danan, and she's a contactee with the Galactic Federation of Worlds. And we know there were people like Haim Eshed, a former Israeli general and scientist, who said that the Trump administration was in communication with the Galactic Federation, and they were kind of saying, humanity isn't quite ready yet for disclosure because our technology isn't up there. So you have that version of the Galactic Federation as being positive, but Lisa Renee, she describes the Galactic Federation, aka Nordic hybrids, as part of this negative alien agenda. And I've read her stuff for a few years now, and I think she's a lighter, gentler version of Ashania Dean, and I do like a lot of her material. but some of the stuff I find very difficult to understand, to be honest. I mean, I read her material, and it's so complex. It's difficult to understand what is she trying to say here, and so my left brain really struggles with it. I know people say, well, just let your right brain take it in and just absorb it, let it work out. But I don't believe that. I think if people are really speaking truth, then it's always going to have some logic or something to it. So yeah. So what do you say to that? I mean, this whole idea that the Galactic Federation of Worlds is part of a negative alien alliance, I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, when she talks about these negative groups and factions, it's more the alliance of them, and it's like a mixed bag. So you got some Nordics, you got some Greys, you got their Draconians, you got this and that. And I think these are just the fallen aspect, but that, like the Lyrans and the Avian, in the Guardian founder races where it all originated, these are the same beings that one might call, these names, but they aren't. And they're not just gonna like not play some sort of role. So yeah, I mean, it is a lot. There are times where, again, I can only take in so much. I mean, she talks about the Aquafarians being wiped out, the Andromedan Council, different Master Christos collectives, Guardian hosts. And then when you look at the Guardian hosts and you look at, the Guardian founder races, this would be the higher levels that we are learning to connect back to. And I feel that, there might have been one that had that name and then it changed and it became more benevolent. I mean, I don't think I go into that in my book because I'm still on the fence about all of that, but I do know that the threefold founder flames, their energies, the 13th gate, the mother energy is connected to the feline Elohim. The 14th gate is connected to the avian seraphim, and the 15th, which are dimensional levels, like going into the higher dimensions, of like the cosmic trinity, one would call it, that particular one is the cetacean whale aquafarian that has not really been available. So she's talking about benevolent Elohim, she's talking about benevolent seraphim, and the fallen Elohim and fallen seraphim are connected to these very beings that one would put in the category of coming together in some kind of alliance to create a negative alien agenda. Now, I feel that not all those beings are going to stay in a negative alien agenda. Some have been captured, some have been compromised. And I think it's definitely like important to question. That's why I don't get into it. That's why I don't even cover that. I do cover negative factions and how these beings mess with the planetary grid network. Some of the Greys that were involved, but then in the end of the book, I'm talking about positive reptilians and positive Greys, because as any kind of species, it's always going to seek to repair itself, but it's at a different point of the timeline, and it's choosing different individuals to contact and interact with. And I think the individuals that is having that experience needs to bring that experience to light and to life, and it's just worth like really looking into. I know Elena talks about the Galactic Federation of Worlds, and that's more benevolent than the Federation of Light. I've heard about the Federation of Light being compromised, but then some new sort of grouping of the more benevolent ones came together. Is that kind of what you're coming from? Is that?
Well, I know that like the US Navy has been working with a positive group of Nordics since the 50s. That on the one hand, you had the Air Force working with the reptilians, with the Nazis in Antarctica, but you had the Navy working with these human-looking Nordics, and these human-looking Nordics helped the Navy build space carriers. William Tompkins talked about that, and I describe it in that book, the US Navy Secret Space Program. So the Navy since the 50s has been working with these Nordics that are part of this Galactic Federation, and right now, they're building fleets of space carriers, and the Navy has been really intent on creating a Star Trek future. So, to my mind, I mean, if we're going to say that the Galactic Federation of Worlds is part of a negative alien agenda, then that kind of confuses everyone, because then it's like, well, so hang on. So that means that the Navy is working with this negative group of human-looking extraterrestrials that are really part of this fallen alliance. So then it's everything gets confused, and isn't that what the Dark Ones want? To confuse us? So to my mind, it's much easier to just like make it clear that what you said is correct, that there are positive Nordics and there are some compromised Nordics, and Lisa Renee and Asher Dean are correct in that regard. But the ones that the US Navy has been working with since the 1950s are a positive group, and they're trying to help us create a Star Trek future. And that's who William Tompkins was talking about. That's who I think Elena Danaan is in touch with.
Right. Yes, and I've heard about the positive Nordics and positive Palladians that even turned away from Hitler's regime, but then some Nordics that were more hybrids of what I heard, that were more human-based hybrids, not the actual beings. There was an underground city built for them called New Berlin, and that the eugenics program and the whole Aryan thing had something to do with Nordics, but not like the whole race of Nordics. And so she does confirm that it's a small faction and it's not like the totality. And so I think when we're looking at things like that First Contact and some of this other stuff, that it sort of gets mixed in with other stories to the point where it's very easy to lose connection with it all and then just deem one particular race as all negative, which I think doesn't help us at all. So the more that we get out there, the more I feel we can truly make sense out of it, and not just stick to just one interpretation. I think there's so many factors there, and the enormity of information like her. The thing is, it's probably going to be shared along the way in one of her, hundreds and hundreds of newsletters. But yeah, when it comes to just defining the negative alien agenda, it was just such a huge part of her expression. I think there's a lot more to the story that she brings in. The terminology can be really, really difficult for people to wrap their heads around. But yeah, I don't mention anything about the federations being negative. I talk about the factions that I'm aware of that include these groups, but not all of those groups, are negative at all. Just like humans, we got benevolent ones, we have ones that aren't, and that some just have had their agenda that would seem to be negative because it doesn't really serve humans. And I'm not talking about the ones that you're talking about, but even like Corey and Alex have talked about 22 competing alien agendas. But the thing is, if we're not powerless, if we step up to the plate, they're not going to be able to have control. And so maybe that's what makes them benevolent, because we're not just looking to be saved. We're not looking, to just go along with some agenda. We're like stepping up to the plate, and we can meet them more on terms that are less seeming to be nefarious. And I think in Awakening, we redeem a lot of what we would otherwise view as negative, because we look at anything trying to control us as negative. But if we're sitting around on the sidelines and not doing anything, of course something's going to want to intervene and be like, come on guys, we're going to do it for you if you don't do it yourself. So that's sort of my interpretation.
Okay, well, it's kind of like get to another part of your book that I think is very important, and that is this. You talk about the bifurcation of timelines, and you talk about the difference between a 3D Earth, a 5D Tara, and a 7D Gaia. So, I mean, what is happening right now? I mean, are we going down this bifurcation of timelines? Is there a split happening? What do you kind of see happening over the next 5-10 years?
I do feel like there's a split. And I mean, does the split look like we're just not going to see this other timeline anymore? I feel like the split is already happening and we're still witness to and observing, this other timeline. And so, yeah, if we stay in 3D Earth, we're very much under some sort of program or some sort of control. We're being assimilated into transhumanism or AI. That's really the 3D game, is to keep us in the personality matrix. It's not looking so good as far as assisting us in awakening. 5D Earth to me is the soul matrix. When we're soul-centered, when we're moving out of toxic relationships or careers that are asking us to compromise ourselves, through fear tactics, like there's no other reality, and we move more into the soul, we are functioning more from our higher awareness, from our intuition. We're meeting soul groups, soul family, soulmates, and we're in that 5D. Also, throat chakra, speaking our truth. That overrides to me the 5G. So I like to joke that we're really 5D towers, and we have the override frequency because 5D is soul. It's not just answering to the frequency modulations and distortions and the conquer and divide tactics that are pitting us against each other. We're more into unity consciousness, forgiveness, rehabilitation. And so that is part of like, okay, there's us and those that are going down that road. I don't see it as a total split. I see a bridge between the two because so many are still in service to others that they're going to help establish healing centers, homeschools, resources with land and community building and growing food and coming together and probably guarding that land with their life when Schwab comes along and says you'll own nothing and be happy. You know, and then some will maybe not make it in the physical and move on to a higher category earth, like some of the prophecies the Thubian prophecy talks about. And then 7D would be, I think, something that's way down the line as far as being able to experience it in this physical form. And it's not necessarily splitting into three, but there's, you know, three scenarios that we're in touch with, right? If we're in 5D, are we being inspired to then go to the next level once we've experienced the soul matrix? Are we then, you know, really healing our DNA? Are we working with sound technologies and healing technologies? Did we get into a med bed? You know, are we really able to move into that crystalline out of the carbon based, you know? And some souls, yes, are ready for that. Others, you know, might just stick in the 5D. So, you know, whether we do that in this physical body or when we leave this physical body and we incarnate later on down the road because we achieve that level and we're not stuck with the density that others are holding, we, you know, are on our unique soul journey and we can activate each other, we can inspire each other, but we're not all heading in the same place. So I think some are going to repeat the 3D or be assimilated into this 3D and maybe be one of those species that later on has to repair itself from the genetic modification and the transhumanism that can eventually, you know, modify it to the point of no reproductive organs or what we might see in certain gray species, not all of them. And then, yeah, 5D, 7D, you know, is a person able to kind of bust through that, whether they keep the physical form or not? I mean, I feel that there's a trajectory and a timeline for the 5D, 7D. How much we're able to stay on that trajectory really depends on our agreements. I mean, a lot of us chose to come down into 3D to help wake people up to these other levels. And some lose themselves along the way and get really hurt and compromised, you know, but their true soul origins from before that was someplace else. So they might go into the afterlife and repair that and heal that or repeat this process in order to just be stronger the next round. Those are mysteries I cannot solve, but or really I can only intuit, I can only just come up with my theories about it. But that's just sort of how I view it, because our 12-strand DNA, which is what we're rebuilding, holds these different levels and different harmonic universes. So 3D is 1, 2, 3, 5D is 4, 5, 6, and 7D is 7, 8, 9. And then the avatar 10, 11, 12 is where Lyra was. So we all have that in dormancy within our DNA. Question is, can we switch that on? And if we can't switch it on, can our consciousness perceive of it to the point where our physical begins to catch up? And then we manifest some sort of event in our lives that moves through the gatekeeper, moves through the fence, moves through the seal that's preventing us from accessing the rest of ourselves. And that takes a lot of soul work, inner work, and a lot of time off to even be able to do that. I think, you know, the most realistic bifurcation is one that is splitting with a big bridge of a lot of people that are still in service, that are still recovering from the targeting, the assaults, and those that are recovering from this harsh and tragic awakening, you know, and having to mourn and let go and rebuild. I think we got a ways to go before it's just going to absolutely split.
So, Laura, where do people go to get your book and find out about your upcoming appearances?
Well, I love your questions. I knew I was going to be incredibly, wonderfully challenged with your questions, but I love it because I couldn't wait to talk to you. CosmicGuide.org is my website. I'm going to put the book there, and you can find it on Amazon. And but I'll eventually have it on my website, and I can send signed copies. I'll be at some events coming up, New Life Expo in Florida, in Boca Raton, and then New Living Expo in San Rafael, California. And I have an online event that you can find on cosmicgaia.org with Dr. Charnel for 3 hours on Saturday. But yeah, cosmicgaia.org. I'll keep it updated as best as I can. Thank you again for having me. And I look forward to seeing you in person, I hope. And great to meet you too.
Okay, well, thank you, Laura, and congratulations again on getting your first book out. I think that's wonderful, and yeah, you do a lot of research, I know, to kind of bring all the pieces together, and you really encourage people to work it out for themselves. So I think that's really a great way to do things, and I look forward to volume 2 and 3 coming out over the next few years.
Well, I look forward to, just what you continue to do and all that you put out, and your incredible work and service and information is just so critical and wonderful. So thanks again.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.